We're live.
Good evening and welcome to this meeting of the Standards and General Purposes Committee. Item 1 is apologies for absence. Do we have any apologies for absence?
Yes, Chair. Apologies from Councillor Ben Butler. Substitute this evening is Councillor Cooper Marbia.
Welcome, Caroline. Item 2 is declarations of pecuniary interest. Are there any declarations? Item 3 is the minutes of the previous meeting. Are they agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Item 4 is the outline of the audit plans, and Suresh is going to take us through that.
Good evening, Chair. Good evening to members of the committee. As usual, we'll take the papers as read, but we did want to pull out some of the key messages because there are some key messages this year. I've got my colleague Simon Luck who's also going to be helping me pull out those key messages for you. So these are the plans for the external audit of the council's 2021 accounts and also the pension fund, which I actually presented yesterday to the pensions panel. It's probably fair to say, just by way of introduction, that 2021 is the year that we see the actual impact of COVID-19 on the accounts. If you recall last year, the timing of it was such that it did impact in terms of things like your going concern assessment and the valuation of your assets. But in terms of actually numbers flowing through the accounts, it was pretty limited. Whereas this year, as you are well aware, you've received a significant amount of government funding, which you'll need to determine the appropriate accounting treatment. And dare I suggest that it's also impacting upon the timetabling of preparation and audit of the account. So we'll come to that in due course. So I was going to ask Simon just to take you through the overview part of the audit plan in terms of the risks and the areas of focus. Simon.
So can I bring your attention to page 9 of the pack?
Sorry, Simon, I'm struggling to hear you. Can you turn the volume up?
Can you hear me better?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, good. I'll just hold on to my mic. So can I bring your attention to page 9 of the pack, where the summary of our audit risks and area of focus are. So some of these would have been the same as last year, and we've got some new risks as well, and I'll talk you through it. So the first 2 risks, misstatements due to fraud or error, and inappropriate capitalization of revenue expenditure. That's the same as last year, and they arise due to the unique position of management to manipulate accounting records. So the third risk is valuations of land and building, and again, it's significant last year, and it continues to be a significant risk this year due to the size of the land and building portfolio, the subjective judgment required by the valuers, the fact that we've identified a judgmental error on industrial properties in the prior year, and the fact that the valuations are likely to be desk-based due to COVID-19. So the next significant risk is new this year, and it's in relation to the implementation of a new payment system, Adelante, which is scheduled to take place in the course of this month. And as the new system impacts material classes of transactions, this presents a significant risk to the preparation of materially accurate and complete financial statements. So on to page 10. So the next risk is going concern disclosure, which is the same as what we had last year. So this is due to the continued impact of COVID-19 on the council. So not saying the council is not a going concern, but we will continue to have to look at the going concern assessments and ensure that the council is prepared and appropriate going concern disclosure. And next is the inherent risk with PFI, and again it's the same as prior year, and it's a risk due to the complexity in the PFI accounting. So the next 2 risks, Ndr Appeals provision and accounting for COVID-19 related government grants, is new this year. and that's due to continued impact of COVID-19. And as Suresh mentioned, most of this impact would manifest itself in the current financial year. So with regards to Ndr appeals, the MHCLG are forecasting net additions to the appeals provision in the next couple of years, and that's due to the businesses seeking reductions based on a decrease in rental price on which the rateable values are based. And therefore it's a higher inherent risk for us in terms of the valuation of the NNDR provisions. And in relation to the COVID-19 related government grants, so the council would have received a significant level of government funding already. So we need to ensure that it's accounted for properly, taking into account the restrictions and conditions related to these grants, and whether or not the council is acting as a principal or agent for these grants. So there's one final bit about the change in auditing standards for auditing accounting estimates. In short, the revised standard requires auditors, so us, to consider inherent risks while associated with the production of accounting estimates. So rather than classifying a risk as either a significant risk or not, we have to consider it on a spectrum. So whether it's a low to high inherent risk, and that would potentially mean that we will have additional work around this area. So,
and let me just close and just a couple of more points to pull out from the overview section. Over on the page 11, that's where we just outlined the materiality levels that we're working to and the values of all what we call audit differences that we'll report to you as a committee. So I think it's important that you're aware of what those values are. Just in terms of reference there to the group consolidation, we do understand that you are looking at whether or not you need to consolidate Moranton given the decisions you made to cease that entity. So we'll obviously update our work to address, whichever way you go in terms of the consolidation there. Over the page, on page 12, we talk about the value for money work, and you might recall that I've mentioned this before. That so it's now a new National Audit Office code that we're operating under, 2020 code, and that's changed the way we look at value for money. I've included on pages 23 to 26 some more detail on value for money, but essentially we are still looking at things like financial sustainability and governance. And it is on financial sustainability that we are likely to have to do additional work around ensuring that your arrangements around sustainability are as expected. And we've detailed that provisional work on page 26 of the plan. And then finally, just two things: timeline. MATOG have now consulted on the sort of the reporting dates that you need to follow, and that is going to be draft accounts by the 1st of August and published audited accounts by the end of September. Just for a bit of national context, that we as a firm and other firms who in this who do this work have fed back to MATG that we think that's unrealistic to expect over 700 sets of accounts to be audited by the end of September when the accounts are prepared on the 1st of August. Having said that, you'll see in section 7 that we are planning to carry out your audit during July and August, which will enable you to publish your audited accounts by the end of September. But I just wanted to give you that national context. And then finally, on fees, which is in section 8, we're just again updating you on where we are with our discussions with public sector audit appointments. And we've also been very clear on where additional work is likely to merit additional audit fees. I'll stop there, Chair, and we'll take questions.
Thank you, Suresh. Are there any questions from members?
Can I just ask a question here, Chair?
Of course, John.
You mentioned that some of the grants that the council gets, you're not sure whether they're acting as principal or agent for the grant. Is that right? Now, how would that affect the accounts? How would that be identified in the account?
Yeah, if you're just acting as an agent, which in effect you just passporting the funds through, they come from the MATLG and they go out to businesses, then they don't really hit your revenue account, because clearly you're just passing them through. Whereas if you're the principal, because you've got some control and influence over where that money goes, then you might be given 10 million, you've only actually dished out 5 million, so you've still got 5 million. So that needs to sit in your balance sheet, and obviously the revenue that you've incurred then goes through your income and expenditure account. So that's the reason why it's an important accounting judgment to make.
Thank you. Adam?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Simon and Suresh, for that comprehensive audit plan. Just obviously two similar points that I raised yesterday, Suresh, so apologies in advance. So around sort of ISA 540, which is the auditing standards changes from this year for accounting estimates, and I know sort of the land and building has been posed as a significant risk, and we had some issues with that over the years, where sort of your valuations team and the council's valuations team had some differences. What sort of extra work will your firm need to comply with to meet those extra auditing standards, given that it's a significant land and building portfolio? And secondly, around sort of the second change of the auditing standards, ISA 570, which is around going concern, given what we've seen at Croydon, etc. So is there sort of, how do you sort of look at the national picture in respect of other councils to give sort of work, and is the sort of assessment from the management around that scrutiny as well?
Okay, thank you, Councillor Bush, for those two questions. So the first one was around the change to the auditing standards on accounting estimates, and you are right, there has been a change, and that ultimately requires us, I should say, to apply even more scepticism than we currently apply when we're looking at estimates, to understand more so than we do now your methodologies, the data you use to arrive at your assumptions, and any other assumptions that you make. I would say for the property valuations work, I think given the work we've done over the last few years, we're probably doing as much as we probably need to do on the valuations, and we've got a good dialogue with you and your valuation teams now. So I'm not expecting a significant additional area of work on the valuation side, but things like the grants, the appeals provision, for example, that will require a bit more work than we've previously done. One, because of the values are going to increase significantly, and two, because I think we need to probably be a bit better at understanding the methodologies and the data and the assumptions that you've operated under previously. So less of an impact on the asset valuations because of the history, but more impact on other accounting estimates that you got included in the appeals provision. In terms of going concern, you're right, again, there's a revised auditing standard around going concern. I would suggest that the work we did last year, we took on board that change at that time, because we obviously knew about that change. So a lot of the challenge that we did on your liquidity, for example, we did reverse stress testing on your forecasting. That was probably as much as even the revised standard now requires. Again, there's an element of being more skeptical, being more challenging, which we will clearly do. But again, I'm not foreseeing a significant increase in the work on going concern. We do take into account what's going on elsewhere, and clearly we take learning from what we see from our own local authority audits, but also from across the sector as well. I would argue that the ones that are currently hitting the press have got particular issues that have presented that have led them to where they are now. And I know that you have taken on board the learnings from the various reports that you've seen on those entities, and we take the same approach, and we build that into our approach as we move forward.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question?
Are there any other questions? Okay. Well, in that case, can I say thank you, Simon and Suresh, for that. And the next item, item 5, is the internal audit progress report. Margaret, are you there? Yes, you are. Sorry, we can't hear you. Can you speak, Margaret, so that we can? No, we can't hear you. Can other members hear Margaret? No.
No,
Okay.
can't hear her.
Amy, are you able to assist in terms of unmuting?
She's already unmuted, Chair. We're just having a look here, see if there's anything we can do.
Okay, well, what I'm going to do is, while you sort out the technical problems, and perhaps Margaret may need to leave and try and rejoin, I'm going to move on to item 7 and ask Kevin Holland if he can update us on the fraud update.
Thank you, Chair. Hello.
Please go ahead.
Can you so you can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I'm not sure about the camera working on this, but I'll take you through.
It would appear that you're working from a forest, or it looks very nice, but
I apologize.
we can't see you.
I don't. Just having to switch from the PC to a tablet just to get this working. So this just provides you with an update on the audit work done during the current year. I think, like lots of services, the fraud work has been affected across the borough, even across Burton and across the 5 boroughs I look after. The fraud hasn't increased, or it hasn't gone away, but it has changed into the areas where it is being seen. And unfortunately, with all the public funded support for businesses, the fraudsters have seen the opportunity, and they are sort of quite good at seeking the opportunity to submit some false applications for the funding that's available. But if I first would take members through to the first table that's on there, which I think is it's page 112 in your report bundle, against the sort of headline performance targets the team have. I'm unfortunately having to report we are behind. The key ones there in terms of property recovered. We have cases that are in the pipeline. I think I've mentioned previously where people now, once they've been identified or caught and they shouldn't be in the properties, they're not, quite a few of them are no longer leaving willingly. So we have to go through the court process to obtain possession. And whilst the courts have been open on and off during the past year, currently the court bailiffs, because they're under instruction not to enter properties, they're not actually executing the final possession warrants. So that's why we have a hold on property recovered and an increasing number of cases that are held with the legal services. That position is also similar across the other partners that the other authorities that do fraud work for. Again, there are a number of cases where the investigation work has been done and even most of the court work has been done. We're just waiting for those final stages that will allow possession to be obtained for the authority. We have had bits where the next one down there is about housing applications.
Which page are you on, Kevin?
I think it's table 1 on page, is it 112 of your bundle?
It's 122.
122, sorry.
Yeah.
Well, I was looking at 112 and I couldn't make head nor tail of it. 122.
I haven't
Yes.
bundles. I thought I'd got the start point from mine, but 122. So sorry, Chair.
Right. Okay, carry on.
So the housing applications, we do rely heavily on those for the NFI outputs. This was supposed to be the odd year out, where we would then go on site and actually review applications. But again, plans for that had to be set aside. But we now have the NFI app. We've received the NFI outputs. We're going through those. There are still some, well, they're easy. There's still some, it's not fraud cases, but it is probably more to do with helping to cleanse the data set. So the waiting list data set on those. So we've got work on those that we are liaising with the housing applications teams. And then the final target there, where for the delivery of fraud plan, so fraud isn't linear, it has its own life cycle. And previously Merton in partnership, they had some very sort of heavily time involved cases in terms of investigation resource for officers. So previously, in terms of the resource that Merton received through the partnership, it was higher, we say, than the notional days or resource they received was higher than it's funded for. But with the directors, and when we report to quarterly, we try to smooth those boundaries out, so there's no need to ask for additional funds. So because Merton has received more in terms of days in previous years, that's why this year we have a slightly lower level, being than the 100% in terms of our notional delivery to you, so we can balance that up with the other authorities. Whilst I'm there, and the other thing I'd like to say about the team, so the central government itself, or public sector, have established a new fraud profession. And myself on your behalf, along with, well, I think it's about 20 authorities, local authorities together, we have submitted an application for membership for the investigators to be part of this profession. And that was accepted just before Christmas. The benefit of that is that it will provide constant drive behind the investigators to make sure they are continually refreshing, upskilling, so they are best placed to deal with any referrals that come through. And there is a framework to monitor that. So moving on to the table 2 on the next page. There has been some movement, in the positive movement in the past month on sanctions obtained. So I think the report you've got says there were 5 or 6 sanctions, closed cases with sanctions. I think we're up to 9, so there's 3 extra added in the past month. And details of the closed cases are attached in the Appendix A. The additional cases that are added, there's a blue badge that's has gone through court, and the officer there, the individual there, did plead guilty to it. So that's a successful prosecution. But regrettably, that person was also an employee of a council, an employee at a school. So there was a further work done there at the school, because it does raise questions about their honesty and integrity. And at that school, following the hearing, that officer was also dismissed. And then table 3 shows the savings, real and notional. What isn't included in this table so far is work that has been ongoing for the past several months, working with the revenues team on business rates. So we've been working alongside your head of revenues, and there have been a lot of applications detected and prevented from being paid first. But we're also doing a number of post-payment checks on the grants that have been paid out. And I think it's the discretionary ones that then become even more complicated. They take a bit more time to unpick. So I haven't got figures and numbers on that within this report, but we are working alongside Mr. Kepler and his team on dealing with that area. And that is that has been a significant part of the work the team has done or had to do across all the partners. There are a number of requirements from the BAYs, from the government department, that go alongside the funding in terms of reporting fraud risk plans and post-payment assurance work that has to be undertaken. So my team have been involved in drafting those and working alongside, so Mr. Kepler and his team, to make sure those are all adhered to. I think the final point I would draw to is in and around NFI and data matching. I know I'm on page 5, so is that 1, 2, I believe?
Sorry, I didn't catch that.
Page 126. I'm looking at paragraph 3.4.
It's 125.
125. Paragraph 3.4.
Right. Yep. Got you.
Yep. So, so previously had reported where there had for a couple of years have been discussion about a London counter fraud hub for data matching. That never succeeded. There were cost and governance issues, and so that is no longer a viable option. Whilst that was being discussed and developed, the National Fraud Initiative itself have sought to improve and enhance their product. In the past, there's already been issues with the number of false positives that the data matching has produced. The current reports that we have, and we are looking through, my team are looking at some of them, but some of them will also go to the frontline services to review. There are fewer matches on there, so some of the sifting appears to be working, but it's still probably about 1 in 20 or 1 in 30 that might warrant detailed investigation when we're going through these. But it is in itself, even if I don't identify, so say lots of the fraud cases, in itself, that will then provide good assurance to the authority that the controls within those underlying systems are being effective. And I think that's as far as I would go to introduce the report, and I'll take any questions.
Thank you. Adam.
Kevin, thank you for that report. Just looking at sort of table 2,
Yes.
On page 123, just in isolation. So obviously from 1819 to 2021, obviously appreciate there's still 3 months to go. There's been a 70% drop in referrals. And if I look at sort of isolation 2021, there's been a 5% conversion of closed with sanctions of the total referrals, in comparison to 1920 of 45% and 1819 of 59%. Is there some sort of bigger picture around system control deficiencies that is just sort of skewed the numbers totally this year, or
Right, I think the skew in the numbers has been but I will have an investigator or a couple of investigators, and they will work out of Merton Council and they'll work out of the housing provider. So that a direct liaison with the frontline staff does help with the referrals or generating or ensuring the referrals and issues are reported through to us. Regrettably, the COVID situation has meant that for I think virtually the entire year that hasn't happened. So that's a significant part of drop off. What we have done and are doing is we're looking to now join in on the teams, the various teams and their online meetings. So we are refreshing and reminding people that we are there to deal with any of the concerns. We're also highlighting, doing the fraud awareness side, in highlighting where issues could potentially be happening or occurring in their area. So yes, I have noticed that a very significant drop off in those referrals. It's for me, I have a good conversion rate in terms of referrals to sanctions. I'm looking for 20. But that I can only apologise. The figures are well below. Some of that is that there are cases we can't bring to their conclusion. Others are, as I say, you pointed out, we're not getting the same level of referral coming through. So I'm having to do some active work on that to engage with both the staff in groups and the wider community through publications and fraud alerts that could be publicised.
Yeah, and would it be possible to get, once obviously the financial year is done, the sort of accurate number to 31st of March? Because obviously I appreciate 2021
yes. If I do that,
is till the 31st of January, and
yeah,
there's also a typo on the report. It says 2020 instead of 2021 as well.
So I apologise for those. Yes. Yeah. So I mean, some of those are notional figures where the savings value has been recalculated for the 2021 year. But I can get those final numbers if I do that via the committee secretariat. I'll refresh all of these so they can be circulated to you all.
Okay, thank you. John?
Yes, can we stay on page 123, table 2, where you say that some of the cases closed with sanction? Right. What sort of sanctions are you talking about? Are you saying these people did a fraud, but you ignore, or you didn't?
Yes.
So you close the sanction. What sanctions are they?
So yes, it is. Some of those are with fraud and issues. So our sanctions will vary from taking civil action, a prosecution, or a warning stroke caution. More detail on those cases is included at Appendix A.
Okay.
So that just provides I think a paragraph on each in terms of what the concern was.
Yes.
And where there's a control failing that needs addressing. That is something that I've regular discussions with Margaret Cullerton. So if there are any control issues that we come across where we're dealing with these frauds, they're referred back to Margaret and the audit colleagues so they can address them.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Any other questions? Caroline?
Thank you, Chair. Kevin, I'm looking at your table 1.
Yes.
So the where you develop this working relationship with the housing team, and we're hoping to have up to 20 applications withdrawn, but the result shows there's only 1. I was just wondering why only 1. What do you think went wrong, and are you reviewing the process? Are you changing it? What can you elaborate a bit on that, please?
So thank you, Councillor. So for me, what impacted that or our plans for this year was COVID. So with the National Fraud Initiative provides sort of every 2-year cycle of data and output for us to look at. So every second year, we rely heavily on the NFI output to review that to come up with the potential false or inaccurate housing applications. This year, what we were planning to do was to literally go into the team and review applications and literally sit down with the assessors teams about what's happening on those applications and check those out. But unfortunately, COVID happened, so that piece of work never happened. I'm still, we've I have colleagues in the team who are looking at the NFI output that we received at the end of January. There are a number of applications that have been identified to be withdrawn, but we don't claim them until they've actually been cancelled off of the system. So there is a process that when we identify them, we provide the evidence of why we believe they should be removed, and they're passed through to the housing assessments team, and they will go through those and update the system and let us know which ones have been removed. So going back to what you said, I had planned a different piece of work, being on site working with colleagues. Unfortunately, that piece of work got cancelled.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Peter, can I ask a question, please? Right. Can I just ask, on table 2, if my math serves me right, when the numbers above where it says total referrals in period 98, then if you add the numbers below, I think there is somebody or someone's gone missing somewhere, because the numbers don't add up.
I apologise for that in trying to get these up to date. So hopefully what I'll do is I'll, as your colleague, fellow councillors asked for, I'll provide these tables again with the full year-end data, and I'll make sure all those numbers are properly checked to make sure they are good and reconcile.
Kevin, could we also get a variance if possible as well, just so it's easy to see the percentage increase or decrease?
What? Yes. Sorry. What do you mean? So just
year-on-year variance or something,
yeah,
or
the
current year versus the prior year, just so it's easy as a headline read.
I'll try and yes, I'll look at how that's presented to you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Margaret, are you?
You're on mute, Peter.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, can people hear me now as well? Right.
Yes.
Margaret.
Yes.
So if we go back to your agenda items, starting with the internal audit progress report, item 5.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry for
the. See you now. Oh yeah, we can. Yeah, I can see you. You're moving.
Oh.
I know.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Chair. So hopefully, I've switched IT equipment, so hopefully this will be fine. This is an update on the internal audit progress on the plan that was agreed at committee at the beginning of the year. We have 41 audits on the plan, and so far we've completed 28 of those, 5 of which have limited. Earlier in the year, in the summer, we did a high-level review of the council's approach as effect of COVID. So we did a review across the 5 councils, which is outlined in the report, and that was very much a review of the governance arrangements, how we've moved on to the decisions and the moving swiftly online for committees, and how decisions have been made and how they were affected. So that review comparing across the 5 councils actually was highlighted that Merton was in a very good place in that regard. We also looked at some of the processes very much from a high-level review of the grants and decisions from that, and the piece of work we did there then fed down into some further more detailed work, which I've outlined in the report. So one of those was on the PPNs, which is the adjustments on contracts that the government put in place. We've also included an infection and control review and a Rough Sleepers grant, but they're actually currently in progress. The report outlines the 5 limited assurances reviews, and as just a summary of the issues that came out of those reviews. Some of these, I don't know if you recall, at the end of last year, we had some of these at draft, so it took a while to get these finalised. As you can appreciate, there was quite difficult to officers are quite busy, but we've managed to get those to a final state, and we've actually managed to get these actions, some of these actions closed off, and obviously we'll be following up any actions that are outstanding. The limited assurance reports I've detailed, I've just given a summary, but it just highlights some of the issues that we found, but it doesn't mean, say for instance, on the no recourse to public funds, the main issue there was just the check with the status on for the Home Office, but actually we found the payment process and the assessment process for clients to be working correctly. So it's just that limited assurance on the status checks that sort of pushed it into a limited. I think my report, I think I could move to questions if anyone's got any questions on the report.
Any questions? Councillor Bakari.
A while back, I mentioned these before, and I'm really glad that you put in the report about the prepaid cards. My concern is that, as you highlighted, it was recommended in 2016 that there was a review that said that there needed to be a consistent approach and that the management of the prepaid cards, and it appears that the document still hasn't been completed or approved. Now that was in 2016. It's been a long time since then. I'm really concerned. I hope you're concerned too. What are we going to do about this? I'm also concerned because 14 people who are not even employed by the council are using prepaid cards. Has this meant a loss of money? Do you know how much exactly? And is there going to be a review in terms of how these cards are used, or even if we should use these cards? It does seem to be not very well managed. There's a real risk of money being, not used properly. There's a suggestion here that that sometimes people are using the cards and it's not even checked. Secondary checking is not happening. So I just don't understand how this is happening, and since 2016 we haven't seen a change.
Thank you. You're correct, yes, there was a report in 2016. I think the officers then have all changed, so the officers now that we're dealing with in the department have taken it seriously. We do have they haven't put some processes in place since 2016, but we still do have concerns about some of the processes which I've outlined in the report. And we've still got 3 audit actions that we are following up on that they need to implement. They have agreed to implement all the actions, but we just need to finalise that these have happened. So there was a few issues on the cards that staff were able to do the full process. There wasn't a split of division of duties, so able to register the card and load funds on it, and then use the card. So there's a few controls like that. The reference on this 14 employees, they still had access, what potentially was shown as access to the system, but there was no evidence to show that they had access to the system because they've since left the council. But obviously it's good practice to remove people's access if they're no longer employed by us. So we've highlighted that.
Okay, thank you, Margaret. I was going to invite Caroline to comment on this.
Can I just ask if Margaret can speak back again later?
Sorry,
thank you.
Can I finish the point?
Yeah.
I was going to ask Caroline to comment specifically on this point, and I didn't want to lose that, which is why I'm asking her, inviting her now. But the obvious question, Caroline, from I think all members of this committee is, surely if officers change, that shouldn't prevent the people who are appointing those staff from pointing out the deficiencies that have already been identified and making sure that they are followed up and dealt with.
Correct, and that is certainly something that we are picking up with them. But I think the previous issue might have been that there wasn't the same level of concern in the department that we had with the way that the system was working, because they were saying it was more important that they were able to have the cards and do it, because we were saying we wanted at one point to withdraw having these types of cards, prepaid cards, because of the lack of controls and what they were spending the money on, and was it appropriate. So we sort of said we'll review, and we're working closely with them and hope to make sure that they do tighten up on their processes and procedures. And sort of some of that will be the same when we relet our procurement card contract. We are going to be much tighter on the areas that people can spend and who actually gets a card in the first place. So this is a work in progress, but it's taken a lot longer than either Margaret and I are really happy with.
Can I just say thank you, Chair, to both Caroline and to Margaret, because I realise I've raised this before, and if they can report back any progress, I'd really appreciate that, and I'm sure the rest of us here would too. Thank you very much.
Well, I'm glad you've raised it, and you know, I do find myself thinking, does the fact that some of these officers are no longer working for us reflect the dissatisfaction that you had with the attitude that they displayed when it came to, you know, actually it's more important that we have the card than we properly account for the expenditure? Because if that is the case, then frankly, they shouldn't be working for the authority.
Noted, Chair.
Sure, can I?
John?
In here. Margaret, can I go to page 98?
Yes.
You got that? Right.
I'm just.
Yeah. I want to make sure we're on the right page.
Sorry.
I don't want to get confused. Page 98? Or
is that yours?
Is that yours, Margaret?
Sorry, what was the
page 98? Is that yours? I don't think it is it?
Not yours, all right.
Well,
that's the next
jumping
page.
on to the next.
The next paper.
Yeah. Next
So
paper,
the
okay.
next item, John.
Yeah, wait for it. I know I was getting confused.
Okay, we can come back to that. Are there any questions on item 5? Adam.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Margaret. Just a quick question, just in terms of how is the world of internal auditing changing in respect of remote working, and sort of how does the procedures sort of, how have you sort of been able to tighten up the sort of work so you can still obtain the same level of assurances that things are working and stuff aren't slipping through the net, which is obviously, I mean, amongst all organizations right now?
Yes, thank you. Fortunately, most systems are now electronic, so we can get access as before. We still hit some areas where there is a manual process. So for instance, the procurement card audits in progress, some of the records are held in the office in a manual form. So we're having to arrange to go in and get access to things. And this year we haven't actually done any school audits because of the you know, the current situation. So it's impacted on some of our work. I would say we're still able to do our main key financial audits. The IT audit, we got Mazars in this year to do an assessment of the review, and obviously they quite rightly have highlighted the cybersecurity audits needed. So that's a key audit, and that's able to go ahead. So I'd say this year, I think at the beginning we were affected, possibly the first quarter. It had an impact on us getting, because everyone was quite busy and getting on with our work. But I would say certainly then it's just kind of felt like back to normal, as certainly in the last half of the year, and we've been able to get access and meet with people. So everyone's contactable online now, and we can get access to systems and records. So yeah, we've adjusted in that way quite well, I think. And I think auditors are used to, they have laptops and they're used to working between sites. So it's not been too big an impact on us. So it's worked fine.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah, I just want to ask them.
Go ahead, Councillor Fraser.
Thank you, Chair. I'm a little bit confused about 420 on page 84. What it says here is that during the pandemic, there were formal meetings, but it's all online and so email. So therefore no minutes taken. So if you don't take minutes, other people do when they meet online, and you can do that. How can you ever trace back what happens?
Thank you. That was one of the findings from the audit, that the procurement board was meetings weren't held between April and June, but there was emails between officers. So because there was no meetings, there wouldn't have been minutes from the meetings, but they all started up again in July. So I think decisions were being made through emails and agreements before that. So that's something that we raised. And then on that audit, we actually did a follow-up, and that action's now been closed because they started up the regular meetings, and they're minuted.
Okay. Any more questions to Margaret? Sorry, John.
Page 81. That's yours, isn't it, Margaret? Page 81.
Yes. Yes.
Right, now it's table 4.1. Audit in final stage, draft stage, and in progress. And we are now at the year end. So we're saying that we haven't completed any audit during the whole year. Am I reading this correctly? Your final
we've
stage.
got 28 audits.
23 at final stage, which means not completed yet. Is that right?
They're completed. The 23 are completed audits. The 5 of where we've
final stage.
Sorry.
So why do you say it's a final stage? Or it's completed since you produced this report?
It probably should say final report, because we do still follow up on the audit actions. But it's the final report's been issued. So we issue a report at draft. The departments that are then meant to respond to each action about whether they accept the action and how they're going to implement it and when they're going to implement it by, and then we issue a final report, and then we follow up after that on the actions.
Well, I suppose I'm reading this incorrectly, but I'm taking it to mean that you haven't completed an audit in a whole year.
Oh.
You're only at stages with it, but that couldn't be the case, could it?
No, we've done. We've completed 23 to final stage and 5, to draft.
Completed. Okay, I see what you mean, but it's a bit confusing. Okay, thank you for that. Okay, Chair, we'll move on now.
Any other questions to Margaret? Caroline, you've got your hand up. Was that from earlier?
Chair, it was just to come back on Councillor Fraser's question, because I'm the chair of the procurement board. So because we didn't hold physical meetings or virtual meetings, there were no minutes, but we approved via email virtual sign off of reports or recommendation and actions. So it was email trails rather than minutes of the meetings till we held them virtually, starting again in July. So it's just to give some clarity and assurance around what we did do and what we didn't have.
In which case, presumably Margaret was able to check the emails and check that all was well with that temporary procedure. Is that the case, Margaret?
We did have access to the emails. We got copies of those as confirmation.
And you were satisfied that all was well?
I think that's why they started to hold them virtually, Chair, because I think there was concerns that emails could be missed or not necessarily followed up. So that's why the meetings were then held virtually.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions to Margaret? Okay, well, in that case, if we can go on to your next item, Margaret, which is the internal audit plan, item 6. And John, you might get the chance to ask your question again.
Yes, I certainly will. Thank you, Chair.
Let's let Margaret introduce it first.
First,
then,
yes, sure.
Then you can ask your question.
Yes.
Margaret?
Thank you, Chair. As you know, we set an audit plan for each year, and that involves looking at the risk register, speaking to directors, attending D&Ts, and a variety of approaches. This year, I've made sure I've included additional contingency because of changing risks in the council that we may need to do other reviews. And I've also included allocation of time for checks on grant claims. So at the moment, as I mentioned before, we started some reviews on the infection control grants, but we're also going to be doing some other assurance work on the contained outbreak management fund, and there's other grants that we may need to provide assurance on. So I've made sure I've factored those in. Just another note really, which is on the main covering report, is we're also the 5-Borough Partnership is setting up a proactive fraud team, which is like a 2-year funded team that's going to be doing some deep dives on procurement. So in an audit, we'd normally look at the process and then we do a sample check, and it would be a smallish sample, maybe 20. But this team is going to be spending a lot more time sort of doing a larger sample check, but also looking at the detail of invoices and what we actually getting charged for, and putting more time into those to identify whether there's any areas of fraud or risk of fraud, or poor decisions and monitoring. So it may come out with internal control recommendations, or it may be, if there's a fraud concern, it will get passed to the fraud partnership to pick up. So I just wanted to make you aware that's a new thing that Merton's going to be taking part in. If anyone's got any questions.
Yes, is it the proactive fraud team you're talking about, Margaret?
Yes, I am.
Because I see you're going to pay them an extra, nearly £69,000 a year. And I was wondering, the normal auditing system should cover all the things that this proactive team is going to identify. Isn't that the case?
Well, it's going to be a deeper dive. It's going to be following through and looking at invoices and what we're being charged for and if they're accurate. So it'll be a bigger, we're hoping from that there'll be some return there'll be some money recovered on if there's errors found or fraud. We'd be able to, so it's a trial really to do this for 2 years to see what we'd find by doing this sort of work.
Yeah, I thought that was a normal or internal audit activity. I didn't know you'd need extra, an extra team, as you said, deep diving to do it.
Caroline, do you want to comment on this? You've got your hand up again.
Yes.
Why do you haven't need an extra?
So thank you, Chair. And I think it sort of links with Kevin's report that he presented earlier. So I think, and I fear that in certain areas, fraud is becoming, I think, potentially more of an issue. And therefore, we just wanted to see how we could see if that's true, if we could stop it. Also links to the work the London Counter Fraud Hub was doing, where there were some boroughs who were not convinced of the business case behind that, and sort of the additional, certainly major additional costs. So this 69,000 is over the 2 years, Councillor Dehaney, so not 1 year, so it's over the 2 years. And for the boroughs have joined up to then share the learning and see if there are things going on across the 4 boroughs around sort of some fraud activity. So, and then we'll review at towards the end of that to see, does it warrant having additional staff to be able to repay it? So putting some of the money in, but we do hope, as Margaret has said, to get some return on that. But if not, then we'll go back to, this is sort of some of the old fashioned audit that we didn't necessarily think we'd need anymore. But we just want to see if the business case then stacks up. Thank you.
Okay, thank you then.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Caroline.
Yeah, just on the same point as John asked the question that I wanted to ask, and I'm not sure I actually got the answer. And that is, what is the difference with what they would normally do in the audit process of testing and what they're going to do now? Is it they're going to have more testing, or what is it that this extra money is going to be spent for?
Well, we've heard a lot about deeper diving. So have they got equipment that will enable them to dive down deeper? Or what exactly is it that they're doing that isn't currently undertaken?
Yeah.
Chair, sorry, could I provide some context to that? Sorry, I can't find a put my hand up button on what's available in my setup.
Yeah, if you can answer the question, we'd be delighted to hear from you.
Hopefully I'll give you some context. So, well, first of all, it isn't money for me or my team or the fraud team. It is a separate team that will undertake this work that comes under audit. It's come about because some of the significant frauds we've had across the partnership, they've come about because we've had tip-offs which tell us exactly where to look. And what we found, and there have been some sizable frauds here, what we found is that if we were doing an audit on it, all the apparent paperwork looked in order. Yeah. I'm going to give you a scenario of one that's, without mentioning the fraud itself, becomes close to fraud, large scale fraud. In terms of, say, maintenance work, you could look at the paperwork that says an order was placed, it came in on that value and the invoice was paid. When you dig down into that order and you find out what plant or equipment was used for part of that repair, and then you find out the plant that is, say, supposed to be a large truck to remove waste, and you check the registration number and it turns out to be a small small hatchback, that's where the fraud comes through. So there are some areas where the paperwork at the top level, fraudsters aren't all silly, they are quite bright and quite good covering their tracks, that if you, in the time that audit have just to look at the top level, everything can seem in place. And it appears to be is fraud where they keep their head just below the surface. They're not taking too much, so it doesn't, become immediately known or apparent because budgets aren't being totally overspent. But officers and members left the feeling they're not really getting the full value out of that particular service. And some of this is because it is being invoices coming through whilst they're below the level for overspend. They include inflated costs, inflated items. And it takes a lot of work, a lot of time to then drill down into those items, and going out on site a lot more to actually see what was done and physically counting things to actually find these. So one of the drives behind this team, they told you the deep dive, it is looking at a much greater scrutiny, and some of the contracts where they involve subcontractors doing bits and pieces of work, is following that full trail through to make sure that the council is getting the full service that it's paying for. So
how confident are we, Kevin, that this is going to not only pay for itself, but actually produce savings for the authority? I mean, Caroline, you've kind of indicated that that's what you're hoping, but you know, is it more than hope, or are we, you know, on a scale of 1 to 10, are we talking about 9 for value for money here, or is it just a bit of a punt and we don't have a clue what the final outcome will be?
Do I seek others for help on that? And that I've given an explanation as to how it's come about.
I think you've just been given a hospital pass there, Caroline.
So I think the fact that we haven't put any savings in and that we're putting additional money in at this stage, I think it's just wanting to explore, is there more underneath it? As Kevin has said, there have been some extensive frauds across the partnership. So we just want to see is there something more there? And that's why we're putting some additional money in, but we'll then review before the end of the 2 years to see if it's still worthwhile continuing what they found and what we've learned from it.
And will this committee get a progress report?
Definitely, yes.
Yeah.
Good. Okay. Any more questions? Brenda.
Right, and thanks, Chair. I don't know who will answer this. I think it probably is Caroline. On page 108, the large page, under ENR, I'm very concerned about highway contract. It says to review the monitoring arrangements in place to ensure compliance. The reason I'm concerned is that I've seen the same bit of road being dug up and fixed within a year about 4 times, and it still isn't done. So who is monitoring, and how do we actually check to see if they're doing what they're supposed to be doing?
This audit was actually requested when I went to ENR D&T, so they said they would welcome a review of this contract. So we'll be looking at meeting and scoping with them the areas that we're going to be looking at. So at the moment, that depth hasn't been discussed. It's being put forward as an audit that should be looked at. There's a lot of money spent on the highways. It's a large contract. So we will be doing a review and coming back to committee with the findings.
And if I can just add, Chair, that's also, I think, the new contract and therefore new arrangements put in place around the spec. So it's making sure that both officers and Conways understand it, and therefore making sure that it still all fits with the new contract and how it was pulled together.
So we look forward to hearing about it. Thank you.
I think Councillor Fraser is requesting an update when that work is underway and completed. Yep. Okay, any other questions? Well, in that case, can we thank you, Margaret, for your reports? And we've done item 7, so we now move on to item 8, which is the annual complaints report, and that's Louise.
Hello, hi, good evening, Chair, good evening, councillors. I'll keep this brief. This is the annual complaints report. The sharp-eyed amongst you will have noticed it's actually dealing with the year 1920. It was due to your committee in November, but due to pressure of work, we had to slip it. So thank you for your forbearance. I think the good news is to note that there's a 47% decrease in the number of complaints received compared to 1819, and also a decrease in the number of those complaints which go to stage 2. So clearly the ultimate goal is not to have any complaints at all, but failing that, the idea that you can resolve them at first point of contact rather than have them escalate is the second best we can achieve. So I'm pleased we've managed to reduce the number of cases which do escalate. There has been also an improvement, I should say, in the turnaround time for dealing with complaints. So there are targets, as you'll see, members set out in the report, of dealing with stage 1 complaints within 20 days and stage 2 within 25 days. And we've improved our performance by 38% in terms of how quickly we turn around those complaints, which probably partly explains why fewer of them are escalating. It's probably fair to say that we attribute some of the decrease in the initial complaints to the settling in of the new waste contract arrangements, which were responsible for a massive increase in complaints the year before. And then just finally to mention the local government ombudsman, you'll see in the report a kind of estimate of the number of inquiries that get referred to the ombudsman. I think it's fair to say we're in the peloton not the highest, but not the lowest either. And again, we are doing some work to ensure that we not only minimise the need for any referrals to be made in the first place, but when they are made, to ensure that we do comply with the timescale set by the Ombudsman, because nothing's sure to get them feeling disinclined to support the council and the fact we don't reply to their queries in time. So we've organised some training for officers right across the council, run by the Ombudsman, to help us understand how best we can respond to their queries when they send them in. But I'll stop there, Chair. Happy to answer any questions. And Karen Lane, who's the head of the complaints team, is also on the call and be able to answer any detailed questions that I can't properly field. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Louise. I lost you there for a bit. Did everyone else hear you throughout, or?
No, it did drop out for about 5 seconds, I think.
Right.
Apologies. Really.
Okay. Well, let's go to questions. Are there any questions for Louise? David.
Maybe one more for Karen. And there's a table that talks about response times and so on, but it seems to me, and this is just from my own personal experience and talking to colleagues, that very often we get a very quick response from officers, and that's welcome and thank you. But sometimes, for whatever reason, things seem to fall a bit behind. And yet there is a 10 working day assumption of getting an answer. And occasionally, because it falls off our radar, we realize we haven't had an answer and it's 2 months down the line, and eventually one comes with a bit of an apology. My question is, as this is a system that's on the computer, are there not reminders that are generated automatically, and can we not be told at the time that it's been chased that it has been chased?
Chair, I could probably come in there, and Karen will tell me if I've got it wrong. So I think you're talking about member inquiries, Councillor Williams, rather than public complaints.
I beg your pardon. Yes, I am talking about member inquiries, and I'm sorry. Yes, I've slightly moved on. Yes,
that's absolutely fine. I think the answer in your question lies in your assumption that we have an automated complaint system, and unfortunately we don't. So the system is really rather manual. Obviously it's kept on computer, but there isn't a system in place that automatically generates chasers when the time limit's close to being up or even indeed passed. So at the moment it's reliant on officers in Karen's team maintaining a spreadsheet. We do send out reminders to all the relevant departments when the time limit is approaching, and again afterwards. But as I say, that relies on a kind of manual check. And sometimes, as we know, people get the reminder, and then with the best will in the world, life takes over, and they need to be reminded again. So it's something that we're constantly trying to improve and to remind people of the need to reply to members' inquiries, particularly. But it would be great to have a case management system.
Okay, any other questions?
Right, could I just say, even a diary system?
Well, there is a diary system, which is why the complaints team do send reminders. I can't really explain why not everybody replies to them, apart from pressure of work.
May I, Peter?
Yes.
So just
Nick?
a very quick thing on refuge.
Sorry, David, do you want to come back on that?
Well, just a final time then. I mean, because it sometimes falls off our radar as well. If a reminder has been sent, I think it'd be quite useful to copy in the member, because when an inquiry is raised, the member inquiry team sort of copy in the member at the same time that they are asking for the response. So it's just a simple matter really of copying us in, so that we realise it's still outstanding, and also we realise it's been chased. Because frankly, if it's perhaps urgent, or at least becoming urgent because a couple of weeks have gone by, then as necessary, we can pick the phone up ourselves to an officer or a more senior officer, and that would be helpful.
Okay.
Certainly happy to take away that and see if we can at least let members know what's going on and tell them that we're chasing.
Okay. Nick.
Cheers. Yes, thank you very much. It's on refuse. I mean, these are really good figures, aren't they? I mean, first of all, the number of complaints has reduced remarkably for the reasons given. I do understand that. Second of all, the timescale of responding to the complaints has improved dramatically as well, which is two really good success stories there. But you know, if you pick up social media, there's this constant chatter telling us that we never answer and that things are actually getting worse. And I'm sure that any of us who actually looked on social media can recognize the names of the people who are saying that. Is there anything that we can do to counter that chatter, which, you know, for whatever motivations there may be for it, you know, or should we just ignore it as background chatter? Thank you.
I think it's always a balance, isn't it, between allowing things just to, as you say, play on as background chatter and risking stirring things up by responding to it. But we can certainly talk to the comms team about whether just putting some of these figures out and some facts out might help quieten the chatter, although I wouldn't be overly optimistic about that. We can give it a go.
Good luck with that. Any other questions? Dickie.
Thank you, Peter. Yeah, to Louise or Karen, and in fairness, Karen has been trying to explain this on the chat to me, but forgive me if I'm just not being very intelligent. And in actual fact, I also got the page on page 138, paragraph 14, 14.2, payments have totaled 18,000 as for loss provision, returning incorrect enforcement agent fees, blah, blah, an increase from 1819 of 1,105. I just wondered if you could explain those figures a bit more, just in case I'm misunderstanding where that massive increase is.
I don't think the increase, I don't think you've got previous years on the figure in relation to payment. So you've got figures in relation to compensation, which is something slightly different. It's almost like a punitive award against the council to compensate someone for the injustice or maladministration that they might have suffered, whereas the payment figures are to make up for actual loss that someone might have suffered. So I don't think, unless I'm misreading it as well, you've got the compensation figures for 1819, the payment figures for 1819, you've got the compensation figures for 1819. So I'm assuming that if you increase 18,189 by 1105, you will have got other way around. If you take it away, you'll see what the difference is. So they were very low figures. No, I think, sorry, I'm misreading it now. It was 18,189 in last year, and that represents a 1,105 increase on the year before, but you haven't got it set out in table form, which I think was causing us both to be confused.
Well, I think you've added to the confusion there.
I know,
Louise.
sorry, I confused myself. I talked myself around to understanding it, but perhaps I haven't helped you
Karen,
understand
you've
it.
had your hand up and you may be able to enlighten us and explain all this away, I hope.
Yeah, the payment of 18,189 was the total payments from the Ombudsman investigations, and part of that is the next agenda item as well, because it was to do with the enforcement agent fees. So that was a different, so there's the local government Ombudsman payments and then local awards and then compensation. It does get quite messy, which is something we can look at making sure. We did try to chunk it down separately, but I can see that it's still quite confusing. So for future, for next year, we'll make sure it's a lot clearer. But there's local payments where managers will, at stage one, if they recognise that they failed somebody, will offer a local payment to stop a complaint escalating to the Ombudsman, who may then decide to offer compensation. And we use the Ombudsman guidance on remedies when we offer these payments to them. And there are then the payments that the Ombudsman advises to pay, which is either to recompensate somebody for something that they should have had, or Ombudsman offer of compensation.
Right, is that all clear to you now?
Clear as mud.
But Chair, I will circulate the figures with a clearer summary table so we can understand it after this meeting. Apologies for any confusion.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, I think that would be much appreciated, Louise. So are there any other questions? Okay, well, in that case, we'll move on to the Ombudsman. Is that right? No, it's it's the governance issues. No, I'm jumping ahead. It's the Local Government and Social Ombudsman report, and that's David. Yes.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
So last July, I brought a report to the committee following a local government Ombudsman complaint and report against the Enforcement Service. The committee wanted me to provide an update report 6 months later. So that's this report here. So the report provides an update on the service. It's been an unusual year for the service. We only recommenced enforcement work in October. So all enforcement action was suspended at the beginning of the pandemic. We only recommenced enforcement action work in October, social distance enforcement, and we started off just collecting parking debts. Since the re-engagement, we have had a small number of complaints. I think we've had 6 complaints, which, the service that we provide, there will always be complaints. Often complaints relate to not receiving letters or correspondence either from my service or the service that has the debt, so parking or council tax. And of course, there are always some complaints about the actual enforcement agents. Since I last reported, the staff have actually been helping with the COVID response and are continuing to help with the COVID response. Just last week, I had staff at Wimbledon Park supporting the surge testing and also supporting the food bank. Since I reported in July, I've undertaken a service review. We've looked at the likely reduction in workload in the short to medium term. We've looked at the loss of income for this year and expected loss of income for next year. And part of that service review has undertaken consultation with the staff, and we're in the process of a restructure which will unfortunately reduce the number of enforcement agents and also the back office staff. Hopefully that restructure will be completed by mid-April. Also attached is the updated improvement action plan that we've implemented across the last year or so. So, Chair, happy to take any questions.
Thank you, David. Are there any questions? Nick?
Not a question, just a comment, because I saw firsthand how brilliant the enforcement officers were helping out in Pollard's Hill, and they really went to it with a will. And in that respect, what David's told us about the kind of necessary cuts that we're going to have to make to their numbers is particularly sad and particularly galling. I hope it just doesn't bounce back in our faces because we can't collect money anymore. But that's the way the government wants us to act. So there we go.
Okay, Hannah.
Thank you, Chair. Just I hope that you can clarify for me, David. Is this enforcement only? Does this cover all enforcement? So even when it comes to noise pollution, planning not being followed properly, Does it go beyond just the PCNs, etc.?
No. So we collect council tax, business rates, and PCNs for both Merton and Sutton councils. So we don't do noise enforcement or anything like that.
Right. So we don't have any potential cuts on that. I'm just asking.
Yeah.
Maybe
yeah.
you know. Yeah.
Okay. So the reductions are because the reduction in PCNs that have been issued and have been issued over the last year or so, and we've not been able to have liability order hearings at the court.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for clarifying that.
Any other questions to David? Okay, well, can I thank you, David, for that report and for answering our questions. And we'll now move on to item 10, which is the member code of conduct. And that's Louise. And you're also doing the governance issues.
I am. Apologies. Thank you very much, Chair. You may recall that at your meeting last year, you agreed to establish a working group to take on the task of reviewing the council's constitution. It was quite a mammoth task, with about 350 pages that need looking at, and quite difficult to look at them in isolation. We've been meeting regularly with that group since the summer. We've made some good progress on a number of areas of drafting in the constitution, but I'm afraid the challenge is too much to get me in a position to be able to present a complete redraft to you for this meeting. So we thought it would be sensible to bring a smaller chunk of our work to you, and then we can perhaps deal with the larger remainder of the task after in the new municipal year. So what I'm asking today is for members to consider whether you wish to adopt the Local Government Association's model code of conduct, with some tweaks to make it more Merton friendly. I think it's probably fair to say that the existing code of conduct for members is very light on the ground, more or less just repeats the Nolan principles, particularly unhelpful, I think, in the guidance it gives to members around declaring interests and what to do if they have got an interest in terms of participating in and voting at meetings. So with the assistance of the working group, which included our two independent people, we've made those few tweaks, and we're bringing it to you today to ask you to consider recommending to full council when it meets that we adopt the new code in the form set out in the Appendix A. It is a much more detailed code than you're used to dealing with, so it would seem to make absolute sense to run some training sessions before it comes into force, so that members can be fully acquainted with what it means for them and their conduct. But in my view, it would be good governance to adopt this revised code in place of what currently is in place. And then we'll turn our minds to the remainder of the Constitution and bring that back either to your meeting in July, or if members could bear it, perhaps to a special meeting, because as I say, it's a very long document and quite a lot of detailed changes that we'll be bringing to you then. But happy to answer any questions.
Any questions to Louise? Councillor Welton. You're muted. You're muted. Can't hear you.
Not hearing you.
Martin, we can't hear you, mate.
Can you help Amy?
Well, he doesn't know he's talking there, but
Martin, we can't hear you. Amy, can you help here?
See what we can do, Chair.
Martin? No, he still can't hear us. We can't hear him. So.
No, we can't hear you, Martin. Well, look, does anyone else want to speak? David, do you want to speak?
I'll try.
Martin, can you try and reconnect in the meantime?
Martin and I were on the task group. I'm just looking around. I don't think any other member of S&GP was. And perhaps Martin was going to just give a little perspective from a member point of view. Certainly what Louise says is absolutely right, which is that obviously the review of the Constitution is grinding on and making, I think, reasonable progress. Of course, and my huge apologies, of course, to the independent members who may still be on the call. Yes, I'm sorry, Katie, I didn't see that you were there. But
Clive is there as well, David.
Yes, Clive, sorry, I do beg your pardon. Well, and the independent members may wish to comment. I mean, we have spent quite a bit of time actually also looking at the procedures and what the council meeting looks like and how we might change things around. And so I might add that candidly, we probably could do as a committee when it comes to it, with having a good look at that after perhaps we've had a proper opportunity to share those changes with our groups. Now, arguably, we could specifically have gone to our groups with the code of conduct here. Certainly, obviously, my two colleagues on this tonight, I gave my views to. I have been feeding back at our group meetings as to where we're at, including that we would be looking at this, the code of conduct at tonight's meeting. And I'm not in opposition to any piece of it. There maybe was some discussion, but I just thought it would be helpful for me to say that by way of background. And again, apologies to the independent members. If Martin's back, I'm sure he'll be wanting to say something.
Well, Martin, are you back, and can you speak so that we can hear you?
Can you hear me now? Is that
Yes,
better?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you now.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I'd just obviously like to say that I agree with obviously with the code of conduct. It has been subject to very extensive work over the past few months, and I'd also like to put on record my thanks to Louise Round for bringing this to committee. I think there is one issue, obviously, in terms of the recommendations, and the issue has come up in terms of chair proportionality. We were unable to come to a resolution on this matter, but I do think that I would like to suggest an amendment to the recommendations in advance of this report coming before council at the annual council meeting, where I understand this is to be ratified. I think it's obviously important that this is obviously comes to this standards committee because it is the last one before the AGM. So I would like to obviously ask that this amendment is put forward. The council will appoint the chair and vice chair of the Overview and Scrutiny Commission and any of its scrutiny panels at its annual council meeting. In each case, the chair and vice chair for each body will not be from the same political party. In the event of a vacancy during the council year, the council will appoint a U chair at the first meeting following the resignation of the chair. All panel chairs are to be members of the Overview and Scrutiny Commission. I think obviously this may clear out any confusion there is in the Constitution, and I believe that this should come forward to the AGM. Thank you.
So, David, were you aware of this?
No.
Well,
no,
okay.
it would have been helpful to have known that. So you're going to bring this forward, Martin. On the face of it, I don't have any objection to what you say. you're right to point up that this was an unresolved issue at the meeting, and it is something that needs to be addressed. But I thought we were going to try and deal with it kind of outside of the committee structure, and clearly we haven't.
Yeah, I mean, I understand there's some ambiguity. That's why, obviously, because it's obviously this is not coming before the annual council, I think it needed resolving. I don't know whether Louise could give any advice in terms of the current constitution on this matter, whether it would need to be resolved or not before the AGM.
Yeah, so happy to. So I think what you're proposing, Councillor Welton, is the sentence that says that the appointment of chairs and vice chairs of the Overview and Scrutiny Commission and its panels shall be in accordance with the proportionality principles. And that's caused some difficulty because that's not what's happened in the past. It's a slightly strangely worded sentence because the proportionality rules don't require chairs to be allocated on politically proportionate grounds. That's just the membership of the committee. And as I say, it's not something that has happened at the moment. The allocation of chairs and vice chairs isn't proportionate to the size of the groups on the council. And in some cases, that wouldn't be possible unless you allocated an arm or a leg of somebody to a position. So I think it is sensible to try and resolve it before we get to the annual general meeting when it would otherwise cause problems, I think.
So is that, I mean, Martin, just to be clear,
yes,
Louise has just kind of interpreted what you've said. Is that a correct interpretation?
I think that's a correct interpretation of the current state of affairs. And I mean, clearly, obviously, yeah.
David, are you saying that you don't have a problem with this, other than you would like to have known about it in advance?
Yeah, I would have liked to have known about it in advance because there's no opportunity to think through the implications when it's just thrown on the table like this. And, you know, we've had a working party that's been meeting monthly. If Martin wanted to put this on the table, then he frankly could have at least had the courtesy to have sent an email around and given us a chance to think it through.
But am I missing something? Because I thought that you both said that this has been the subject of discussion at these meetings, and that there hasn't been a consensus emerged. Have I misunderstood that?
That's correct. I think it's probably true to say.
Well, I don't dispute that, but it hadn't been brought to a conclusion.
Well, when was it going to be brought to a conclusion if it's got to go to the annual council meeting?
Well, I think it would have been quite nice for there to have been a discussion behind the scenes, frankly.
I do apologise about that.
Okay, Hina, you want to contribute here?
Yeah, thank you. I think I'm obviously not part of the discussions that have been taking place previously, and I am wondering whether this amendment has been put forward to the leaders of each group. I think communication is key and transparency is key.
Well, I don't think there's any requirement for, I mean, members can at any committee meeting put resolutions forward, and there is no requirement that they're discussed in advance with the leaders of groups. And in fact, it's frequently the case that you know, we surprise one another with what is put forward, unless, I mean, Louise, if I'm mistaken, correct me, but by all means. But I'd like actually to hear from the independent members of the panel who've sat patiently and have participated in this process and probably spent many hours either debating it or listening to others debate it. So, Katie, would you like to say anything?
Yes, I'd be happy to. I think the first thing I would say is I would just sort of direct members' attention back to the code of conduct, which I think we've sort of moved slightly away in looking at the proportionality issue. And in those terms, I would commend the Code of Conduct to you. I think it's a good piece of work. I think members have considered it very thoroughly, and I think it gives Louise as monitoring officer and Clive and I as your independent persons a good basis to judge whether the Code of Conduct has been breached. And I think it gives you as councillors a good basis to understand what your risks are in terms of, if I do this, I might be breaching the Code of Conduct. And I think your existing Code of Conduct makes that quite difficult for you, quite frankly, because it is so vague that actually it's very hard for both you and we to judge in those cases. So I think you're putting yourselves in a better position by adopting this, because it is a lot clearer what is the right thing for you to do, or what is beyond that, and when you're going into breach. So I would commend it to you, and I think it's a good piece of work, and I think members work very well together in doing so. I think what Councillor Wilton has brought was a point that was not, we weren't able to reach agreement around at the working group. And part of my understanding around that was not necessarily whether there was a dispute around what was discussed, but that at times some of the parties weren't actually comfortable discussing it. So it wasn't always actually on the table for discussion. And that was why Councillor Williams, I think, is right in saying we haven't reached a conclusion on it, because we haven't had the sort of full set of discussions on it that I think everybody wanted. It wasn't necessarily that everyone was at cross purposes. It was the discussion hasn't been had. Now, what's not entirely clear to me, because I'm not as familiar with your cycle of meetings as you are, is whether there is a way for this to be discussed offline and brought back in time for it to be ready for the annual general meeting, because I can absolutely see that there are benefits in doing that. If there was a way of doing that, I think I would commend that to you, because I think there would be benefits in taking this offline and seeking agreement between the parties. That would probably be my recommendation to you. But Louise and you others can judge whether that is possible within the timetable that you have. And I'm afraid I can't judge that. I'm not sufficiently familiar with it.
Okay. Clive, would you like to add anything?
Yes, I think we've spent a certain amount of time on the model code, and obviously it's been considered by the Local Government Association. So there's no real reason to depart radically. I think it would be helpful, though, in considering the code, if Louise were to highlight those matters where a departure is being made, so everyone understands those small, and they are, I think, small changes, departures from the model code. But the model code, I think, is generally good. There will always be questions one could raise. So I would not say the Local Government Association model code is watertight, and I don't think the amendments being proposed are intended really to make it any much more watertight, but just gives a little bit more definition on certain levels of pecuniary interest and things like that. So I personally would prefer just a little chart to go with us, setting out the slight changes from the model code now proposed, so we understand to what extent it has been Mertonized. My other point, addressing the point about the chairmanship of the Scrutiny and Overview Committee, was that the matter has not been, in my view, fully bottomed out. There was to be a further meeting of this working group before this committee's meeting tonight, which was not held for one reason or another, and Louise can talk to that. But for whatever reason, I don't think the matter has been bottomed out. Whether or not the matter can be slightly, contentious issue can be bottomed out through behind-the-scenes conversation, I don't know. I think it's a largely political conversation, and I know Councillor Kohler had some views which were not necessarily shared by others. I think it would be helpful, though, that when that behind the scenes discussion has been held, that there would be another conversation, the working group, so we understand it, because it's quite an important issue. I don't think it should be decided here and now, if that's what Councillor Welton is proposing, if I can be so bold as to suggest, because I think there's quite a lot more discussion to be had.
Louise, am I right in thinking that before this can go to council, or in order for it to go to council, it needs a recommendation from this committee, and that there isn't another opportunity to do that before the meeting? Could you explain the position and the timetable, please?
Yes, so you're right to say, Chair, that normally amendments to the council's constitution, which is what this would be, can only be made by council on the submission of a report from this committee. The next council meeting is now not, there was going to be one in April, but there isn't going to be one now until the annual council in May. So unless you wanted to meet again, it wouldn't be possible for you to make that recommendation. There may be a compromise position, which would be for you to delegate to me the ability to make a report to the annual general meeting with a recommendation if one is reached based on consensus. If it's not reached by then, I imagine my report would be a fairly bland one, to which people then could move amendments if they wanted to propose a different option. So that's the only slightly tortuous way through either deciding tonight or not I can suggest to you.
Okay, thank you. Martin, do you want to explain what it is that's led you to make this proposal and why you think we need to make a decision here and now?
I think it's the last, obviously, possibility in terms of the opportunity before the annual council meeting, because there is no further meetings scheduled for this meeting. I think it would obviously keep the current practice for the council that we have in terms of the chairs, and it's building on what we have had in the past few years. I think it clears up some of the ambiguity there is in terms of the constitution at the moment, and that this amendment would help clarify and simplify things going forward, Chair.
Okay, David, you want to respond to
well, yes, I mean, now I've had sort of a bit of time to think about it. First of all, let's be quite clear, and thank you to the independent members. Martin's amendment tonight has nothing to do with anything that is on our agenda paper. Nothing whatsoever at all. What's on our agenda paper tonight is to agree the code of conduct. Martin has just from nowhere, although it's been talked about in the meetings, which, as Clive Douglas has pointed out, the last meeting was cancelled on the 15th of February. And I'm learning tonight, live on air, that apparently we're not going to have a council meeting in April. And I'd quite like to know why the hell we find out something like this at a meeting where we're being invited by Councillor Welton to suddenly change a procedure that will come at the annual council meeting. It's absolutely outrageous. Absolutely outrageous. And it's just not the way. It's not on your agenda tonight, Chairman. It's not on your agenda. Do you expect that the next meeting of this committee or at a future meeting, I or any other member of this committee should suddenly put onto the agenda an item to change the constitution? No, absolutely no. And I'm certainly inviting the committee to reject making this change tonight. I am prepared to consider that a change might be made at the annual council meeting, but not until it has been properly thought through and discussed, and we've had an opportunity to actually understand what it means.
Well, I mean, I'm. If we can, I thought at the beginning of this discussion you were indicating, David, that you were not unhappy with it. You seem to have moved quite some way in a relatively few minutes, and I'm simply wanting to find a way of getting this. I mean, the alternative is that we leave things as they are until the following year, or is it possible, Louise, for us to consider this a future council meeting? Does it have to be at the annual council meeting that such issues are considered?
It's because the appointments are made at the annual general meeting that the need to get it sorted out this year, in my view, arises, because we've been appointing in a way over the last few years which doesn't accord with the Constitution, which perhaps isn't the end of the world if everybody accepts that's what happens, but it's been drawn to our attention that it's not currently constitutional arrangements, and that's going to be challenged by at least one group on the council. So we do need to resolve it. Apologies, Councillor.
We've set up a panel to go away and look at this, and they haven't been able to reach an agreement. You're asking us to work to a timetable, and is there any prospect of an agreement being reached when there is such a divergence of views?
I can't really comment. As Katie Willison said, we didn't finally get to the end of the debate about it. It's possible we might be able to reach agreement, hence my suggestion that if you were to delegate me authority to submit a report on this issue to annual council without it having to come back to you following further discussions, as I say, that may end up being a fairly anodyne report if agreement is still not reached, but then at least it could be voted on at council without the need to come back to you.
I buy into that, Chairman.
Well, I mean, I'm just going to ask the question, if I may, Louise. You've just indicated that part of the criticism of the existing arrangements is that it doesn't comply with the Constitution. If the Constitution requires that issues of changing the Constitution have to come through this committee, then delegating the power to you would be in itself breaching the existing Constitution, wouldn't it?
No, I don't think so, because the power to make recommendations is delegated to you, but there's nothing stopping you delegating that on to someone else on an individual, case by case basis, as such as this.
Adam, you've had your hand up for a long time, so.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be brief. Listening obviously to the independence persons, Katie and Clive's comments, which obviously I appreciate. I would be comfortable if we could defer this and delegate it to Louise so discussions can be held fully and properly. And that's obviously my view on record.
Brenda?
Thank you, Chair. David just mentioned that he's just hearing online that the council meeting has been deferred. I had the feeling that most people know that there is an election on the 8th of May. And so 6 weeks before that, we wouldn't be having any council meeting or any of those meetings. So I'm not sure what's happened since, because we were talking.
Well, I'm sorry, Chairman, and Louise can confirm, we don't have any elections. We're not in PERDA. There is no reason why we cannot have a meeting on the end of April. Is that correct, Louise?
That's partly correct. It is correct. We don't have an election. It's a GLA election. That doesn't mean that PERDA considerations don't apply, but equally, PERDA doesn't necessarily automatically mean you can't have a council meeting. But I think it is. I think I'd understood. So I'm sorry if I've spoken too soon. I certainly know your group leader was aware that the meeting has been cancelled. But so I didn't think it was news. But forgive me, as I say, if it was.
Sorry. So where do we go from here? We've got. Sorry, Nick.
Question.
Nick, do you want to speak?
Yeah, I wouldn't mind asking. I mean, because I am genuinely a bit confused about this. What, if I can ask Louise, Chair, what happens to overview and scrutiny if we don't take what Martin has put forward tonight? What happens under this new constitution? Does it throw everything up in the air, or do we carry on like we've always carried on?
Well, what it does do is remove the requirement to try and achieve an exact allocation of the chairs and vice chairs in the proportions on which the groups are represented on the council, and that's not what currently happens. It still maintains the requirement for there to be a different person from a different political group chairing and vice chairing. So it's not, wouldn't allow, for instance, the administration to take all the seats, all the chairs and vice chair seats. So what it would leave it, what actually in practice it would mean that the appointment of those seats would be a matter of political negotiation at the annual general, leading up to the annual general meeting, subject to the requirement that no one committee or panel can have the same political group chairing and vice chairing it.
Chair, as you know, I've been doing this almost as long as you have, and I'm worried about the practicality of leaving it up in the air until the night of the full council. I think what Martin is putting forward, quite frankly, is just a practical amendment. It's that thing that says, well, you know, this is a body of work that has to be done, and you know, rather than have kind of the potential, even if it isn't realised, the potential for some sort of tokenism, that we can, that what Mark is putting forward will actually make overview and scrutiny work. I speak from a personal experience as well of having fallen victim to proportionality, believe it or not, on the Thames Regional Flood and Coastal Committee, where I actually was in the process of changing government legislation and was deeply involved in it. And then the local elections happened, and because that body sticks to pure proportionality, I was replaced by somebody who never turned up to the meeting. So I suppose you could say I'm personally struck by that. But I think from a point of view of getting the job done, Chair, isn't necessarily a political thing. It's actually getting the workings of the council going. What Martin is putting forward is very sensible indeed. And I have to say I do support him. Thank you.
Does anyone else want to speak on this matter?
No.
Caroline.
Chair, just want to concur with what Nick just said. Listen to what Martin read and what other people have said, and I think what Martin is proposing is just going to provide more clarity to what we have. You know, and yeah, so I think we should do that now rather than later, or maybe even not having the opportunity to do it until next year, and because of the elections coming up. So I just wanted to make that point. Thank you.
Hannah?
Yeah, I'm actually really concerned. I don't think decisions should be made just because there's an election coming or because we need to get on with the job. Decisions need to be made considering all points of view and considering all the aspects of what this entails. I am incredibly concerned that you are just willing to push this forward without it coming to a proper end. You should have been able to discuss this without bringing it on to us like this when it wasn't on the agenda, when we weren't expecting this. I'm very, very concerned. And if this is the way you're going to be working, all sorts of decisions could be made this way, couldn't they? It just sets a precedent. I'm very, very concerned, and I would be very concerned if you do go ahead in this fashion. It's not right.
I'm raising a point of order, Chairman.
What's your point of order?
My point of order is it constitutional for us to take an amendment, or indeed not an amendment, it's not an amendment, to take a motion to amend the Constitution, which is not on the agenda paper of this meeting? That's my point of order.
Well, perhaps I can invite Martin to explain where this amendment would come, because if it's not within the Constitution, then I think David's point is correct.
I think obviously legal advice. I think what I'm proposing is actually legal and lawful, and obviously it's for council to determine their decision on this proposed amendment when it comes before the council. Obviously, if I'm out of order, the head of legal would be able to advise, but my position is that this is an in order amendment.
Well, what I'm inviting you to do is say, where does this amendment come in the papers in front of you, in front of us?
It comes as a recommendation to council, doesn't it, Chair?
So it's not related to the papers in front of us.
Well, it's obviously because it discusses the Constitutional Working Party. So, I think this amendment is in order. It's the only appropriate place to raise it within the agenda here tonight.
Louise, can you give us
Code of conduct is going to annual council meeting, and this is obviously an amendment to that, and obviously it's for the committee to determine whether they wish this amendment to proceed or not. But I'm sure if it is out of order, the legal officer would accordingly advise. But I do think it is an in order amendment. Louise,
I think we're going to have to press you for your advice here. There are members that take the view that this is out of order, others that say it is. Can you give me your advice, please?
And no, I consider it as in order. The report refers to the Constitution Working Group, and this is about a matter and is a report about the Constitution, albeit quite narrowly. I don't think it's out of order to add an additional recommendation to focus on one part of the Constitution. But bearing in mind the whole report is referring to the working group that we've had looking at the Constitution, and talks about a further report coming to you. What it does is single out one aspect of it for being dealt with now, because it needs to be dealt with now because of the timing of the annual general meeting and the fact there's an inconsistency in the Constitution that needs resolving before then.
And is it your view, you've been involved in these discussions, have you, all of them, Louise?
Yes.
Is it your view that we can resolve this issue, or that there will be differences no matter how long it continues to be discussed?
I don't think I can answer that question, Chair. It requires people to move their positions.
Right.
Okay. On the record, I don't know if you want to move to a vote now, Chair, on this.
Well, I had seen Hina with her hand up, so I am going to allow her to speak.
Yeah, I'm just asking a question in terms of the legal position here. That Councillor Martin Welton is not a member of this committee, so therefore, what is the legality of him bringing forward this amendment in the first place?
I am a member of this committee, and I've been legally appointed to it.
I must say it's unusual for this committee to get involved. I mean, I'm looking at the members of this committee, which is on the front of the agenda, and I can confirm that Councillor Welton is a member of the committee. We've had legal advice saying that this is not out of order. There are disputes about that, but we've also had a member ask that we move to a vote, and I suspect that we're going to find ourselves not agreeing with this. I'd still like to find a way of resolving it, and I keep going back to the original comments made by David that he didn't object to it. So is it that you haven't been consulted, David, or is it that you just don't like what is proposed?
No, it's the fact that we've been ambushed tonight, and I have to say that when I first started to speak, immediately after Martin spoke, I hadn't focused on the fact that it's not actually what's in front of us tonight. I'm aware that, very aware that, it is something that's been raised and talked about. But you know, things have moved on. Firstly, we didn't have the meeting on the in February. In actual fact, it wasn't explained properly why we needed to deal with this tonight. Why didn't we just deal with the whole changes to the Constitution at one go, perhaps in a special meeting? But we didn't have the meeting in February. We're now told tonight that there isn't going to be an April council meeting, and that there's something that we need to do before the annual council meeting. Well, why couldn't we have had a paper put round late on it? Why couldn't we have had an email? Why couldn't we have just had chance to think through precisely what it is that's being made? We've not been circulated with anything.
I've not had the benefit of taking part in the discussions that have gone into the detail of this.
No, that's an issue that could be resolved when we bring the rest of the Constitution back.
When?
Well, I mean, that's not going to be until July, is it?
Okay. So is that what you're suggesting? That we retain the status quo for the time being and debate this at a later stage, thus giving the opportunity for the discussions, the informal discussions behind the scenes to take place. But in the meantime, we stick with the status quo. Is that a way forward, David?
I think it is. I was prepared to accept Louise's idea of the committee simply mandating her to put a report to council, and the council makes a decision then. At least that will be the decision of this committee.
If we do that, we're going to be in a situation where people will still be able to say, we could have solved this if we were given the chance to bottom it out. I think.
Well, I would prefer not to deal with it tonight, frankly.
Okay, so I think I'm looking for a way of moving forward that enables us to not get into divisive systems and kind of arguments here. So what I would like to suggest is that we retain the status quo for the time being, that we give this panel an opportunity to complete the work that it's been asked to undertake, and that am I right in thinking that, Louise, we could agree the new code of conduct, but agree also this evening to not deal with that one outstanding issue until a meeting in July, and then hope that between now and then we can resolve this in that panel?
Can I make a suggestion that we have a delegated report on this to the annual council meeting, Peter? So obviously we have discussions, but we have a delegated report from the head of legal, because I think it does need resolving at the annual council meeting.
Well, in that case, that's what Louise was suggesting. Is that?
I'm happy to go with a delegated report, so this can come to the annual council meeting.
You indicated a few moments ago, David, that was your preference as well. Is that still the case?
I said I could buy into that, right, because I think we are setting a dangerous precedent to deal with these sort of issues off the cuff.
I'm looking at not making a decision here now. You've said that you don't think that it's fair to be ambushed and bounced. So I'm looking for a way to avoid that.
Yeah, well, I buy into the delegated report, Chairman. I did say that a little earlier.
Are you willing to go with that?
Yes, as long as it's a decision that that I feel that everyone's had a chance to be involved with. Yeah.
Okay. Well, in that case, I think we should accept Louise's suggestion, and we have agreement from all the parties, and I'm pleased that we've been able to arrive at that. It's taken us a while, but I have wanted to try and keep us together as a committee, and I think we've managed to resolve it. And I would encourage the behind the scenes discussions to continue, to be completed. If we can't agree, then clearly there will be a vote at the annual council meeting, and the democratic structures and procedures will apply. But if we can find a way of resolving this between now and then I think we should, and I would encourage all the parties to do so. Can we agree that proposal then?
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Agreed.
So we now move on to where are we? Are we? Have we dealt with 10 and 11, or do we need to do 11, Louise?
You don't need me to introduce 11. Hopefully the contents are self-explanatory. I've tried to pull together what used to be several reports into one, but one of the recommendations is to appoint a member working group to consider nominations for awarding free person of the borough status. So you do need to agree to formally appoint that working group, either to establish it now, or to agree that the group leader should nominate their representatives to be part of it, or indeed the member working group we've just been talking about could perhaps take that role.
I think we've given them quite a task already, so I suggest that we ask for the leaders to nominate people to that group, and allow the other working group to get on with the important work that we've asked it to undertake. And there may be others that are keen to play their part. Okay, so can we agree that then?
Agreed.
Thank you. And then item 12 is the work programme. Can we note the work programme?
Noted.
Noted.
Thank you. And then item 13 is the exclusion of the public, and that requires me to read out to resolve that the public are excluded from the meeting during consideration of the following reports on the grounds that it is exempt from disclosure for the reasons stated in the report. Is that agreed? How do we actually ensure that there aren't members of the public still involved, Amy?
We'll stop